Hi, my name's Kevin Hicks. Welcome to the History Squad. Now, today's video, it's a true story, all about Phineas Gage. Right the way back into the mid-1800s in the United States, working on the railway, he had an accident. His tamping spike, I've made a replica here, was driven through the left side of his jaw, up through the cheek, through the eye, and out through his brain and the top of his skull. The spike actually landed 80 feet further down the workings. This is an amazing story, but I must warn you, it's a little bit gory. Phineas Gage, what a story. Born in 1823, New Hampshire, United States of America, being the eldest of 5 children. He was described as being very healthy, muscular, strong, iron-willed. He was 5'6" tall, about 150 pounds in weight. Hardly ever had a day's illness in his life. Grew up working on the farm as a youngster, but very soon got to use explosives both on the farm and in the mines and quarries thereabouts. So this is a guy who's gaining experience using gunpowder, black powder, in his early years. Now, come 1848, he's employed on the Hudson River Railway. This is in New York. He was employed to blast open some of the rock, but by September he's actually the blasting foreman. So he really is good when it comes to explosives. A statement from his employers say he was efficient, capable and persistent in the ways he operated with the explosives. He in fact had a tamping iron. This is Kev's wooden replica. It's pointed at one end, just over 3 foot long and about 1.25 inches in its width, in its diameter there. So Phineas Gage, he's not just somebody who is messing about with explosives. He's a bit of an expert. Now, when it comes to the railways in those days, especially going through the United States, you have rock formations. You've got to blast your way through. And what they did, you can often see it on some of the films, they will hammer in these spikes to make a hole inside the rock. And then your explosive man will put down the gunpowder, he will put the fuse, and he will put then the sand, and using the blunt end, he will tamp it down. You have to be so careful. I know this from bitter experience of witnessing an explosion with gunpowder which tore through somebody's body. Awful to see. So I know firsthand the power of gunpowder explosives. Once you've tamped it down, all your other holes are ready. You bring all the fuse wire outside, everybody clears, and then boom, you blow half a wall down or you blow some more into the tunnel. This is what Phineas Gage did for a living until that fateful day. It was on September the 13th, 1848, round about 4:30 in the afternoon, when Phineas Gage was preparing an explosive charge in the railway cutting. He heard voices behind him just as he was about to tamp down a gunpowder charge. As he turned, it's thought that he failed to put in the sand on top of the charge, because as he tamped down with the iron spike, it must have sparked and the explosive charge went off. It fired the iron spike. His head was turned. It hit him somewhere around here, went through the cheekbone, through his left eye, through his brain, and out the top of his head. And would you believe it? That iron tamping spike landed 80 feet, covered in blood, bone and brain, further down the railway cutting. Can you imagine the scene in that railway cutting? Boom, massive explosion, rocks shooting out everywhere. Phineas Gage is thrown on his back. The iron spike shoots down the cutting. When the men recovered the iron spike, they said it was greasy with all of the blood and bits of brain upon it. This is a scene of horror. Poor old Phineas, he starts to shake and convulse his arms and legs. And then to everybody's astonishment, he speaks. He then gets up and walks towards the roadway. His men can't get their head around what's happened here. There must have been a lot of blood coming out of the hole in the side of his face. But he climbs onto the ox cart with very little help, and they drive the 3/4 of a mile back to town. Phineas sits upright and he's chatting to everybody. When he arrives in the centre of town at his lodgings, they help him down. Very little assistance is needed. Now remember, this guy has got a hole straight through his head, and there's part of his brain is missing. He sits on a chair on the veranda to his lodgings, and he chats to the men around him. These men must have been expecting poor old Phineas to drop dead at any minute. But what does Phineas do? He talks to them about how he's hardly ever missed a day's work in his life, and he's eager to get back to work on the railway. I don't think he had any idea how serious his injury was. They're now waiting for the doctor to appear. Whilst Phineas is sat upon the chair on the veranda of his lodgings, Dr. Edward Williams arrives. That's around about 5 o'clock. And he looks down from his carriage and he can see on the top of Phineas's head, brain pulsating. And it's as if part of the head was like an inverted wedge-shaped funnel. Something had passed through the head, he thought. And he could hear Gage relating exactly what had happened, that the spike had gone clean through his head, but the doctor didn't believe it. Now, I've got a piece of the doctor's original statement here, and it blows your mind. I did not believe Mr. Gage's statement at the time, but thought he'd been deceived. Mr. Gage persisted in saying that the spike had gone clean through his head. But then Mr. G gets up and vomits. The effect of vomiting, the pressure, pushed about half a teacup of brain out through the top of his head, through the exit hole, and drops upon the floor. This is incredible, isn't it? Well, as you can see, I've made a model, and I think it's time I showed you with my model pretty much what happened to Phineas Gage. So, before I actually show you the model of the skull I've used for the accident, let's show you one of my other skulls. So you can see it's all complete, no problems at all. Just to remind you of what the human skull actually looks like. However, you drive a great big tamping spike right the way through it, it changes it somewhat. So I'm going to leave the lower jaw behind, and I'm going to show you how the spike has gone through. Fortunately, it went through with the spike, the pointy end first. Now, as I was making the model, a piece broke off here, so I can't replace that. So just bear with me. So it's driven up through the cheek, it's gone through the eye, through the brain, it's come out through the top. Let's see if I can get it. Yeah, it's going all the way through. Now, can you imagine the force of this? And there's an interesting thing on my model here. That part of the forehead was actually fractured. And you can see that on the photographs of Phineas's skull later on. So this has gone through and landed 80 feet away. That piece is still there. That must have been the piece of bone that was sticking up like an inverted funnel. So I'm going to just take the lid off my model and show you how I've cut away the part of the brain to allow the spike to go through. So just to let you know, nobody was hurt during the filming of this process. But if we take out my model brain here, have a look at that. Now I've compared this with some of the detailed illustrations of what they thought would have happened. And pretty much, if you look at it from that angle, it is the front left lobe of the brain. It's basically gone. And I know as a side effect to the whole injury, all the bits of bone, blood and such simply trickled down through the inside of Phineas's skull, going down his throat, making him gag and vomit. This is quite incredible, isn't it? And if you look at the fracture there, so the whole side of his head was distorted and swollen, almost as if it had almost, exploded. It's quite incredible. And I'll tell you, I've seen some injuries. I've seen the devastation caused by gunshots, explosions, and also by road traffic accidents. And the thing that amazed me, especially with the gunshot to the back of the head, one British soldier, he survived. And he'd lost a massive chunk of his brain. But that was in fairly modern times. That was 1979, 1980, if I remember correctly. This is in the 1840s, and it's before the American Civil War. It's before medicine really advanced through that terrible war. So let's have a look how those country doctors basically dealt with such a catastrophic wound to Phineas Gage's head and brain. Dr. John Harlow, Phineas's own physician, turns up at the scene at about 6 p.m. Can you imagine the scene that greeted this doctor? The gore, the horror. And don't forget, these doctors were not military surgeons. They weren't used to these kinds of accidents, horrible things. And yet the doctor, he writes down that Phineas suffered with most heroic firmness. It's incredible. And that Phineas recognised the doctor at once and was perfectly conscious. And Phineas stated that he hoped he was not hurt much. Wow. But the doctor noticed that Phineas was becoming more and more exhausted by the loss of blood. All around him, the bedclothes and Phineas's own clothes were actually covered in blood and gore. And Phineas was swallowing blood, so much so that every 15 to 20 minutes he had to vomit or regurgitate that blood and spit it out. A scene most horrendous. Dr. Williams was still on the scene and assisted Dr. Harlow in shaving the scalp around the wound of poor old Phineas. And they removed coagulated blood and bone fragments. And also, get your head round this, an ounce or so of brain. They also probed inside the wound. This is at a time when doctors didn't go inside the skull. Trepanning, that's a different thing. This is actually going into the brain. They've removed all of that horrible gore out of that. Then they replace 2 large pieces of bone and they fix them in place with adhesive straps, but they leave it propped ever so slightly open. And then they bandage it round loosely. They're allowing the wound to drain. Now, poor old Phineas, he'd not only been pierced by this iron spike, he'd been burned as well. So his face is burnt. They've applied a loose bandage and a wet compress to the cheek to cover that wound and allow it, that's the entry wound, to drain. They also then have to deal with Phineas's burnt hands and forearms. They were quite badly burned. So the whole lot here around the head, it's got loose bandage and they need to secure it. So what do? They put on a nightcap and they secure everything around so it will stay in place. Then the doctor's orders are that as he lies down, his head is to be elevated. Later on in the evening, Dr. Harlow visits his patient Phineas, and Phineas is conscious, but his legs are agitating him, and that up and down, so something's not right. Now, the next day, his mother and his uncle arrive, and he recognises them, but he doesn't want to speak to his friends because in his mind, he's going to be back at work the next day. And what follows on is he slips in and out of consciousness, almost into a coma. And at one stage, the doctor examines him, and it's disgusting. His eye He's bulging out, but there isn't an eye there, is there? The eye has long since gone. What it is a build-up of pus and fungus, as they said. Also, brain matter is pushing out of the top. They remove this, they clean it, but then the stench coming out of his mouth from the wound is disgusting. He now slips pretty much into a coma, in and out of consciousness, won't take any food, can only answer in monosyllables. His friends beg the doctor, leave him alone. No more treatment, please. Remember that Phineas, he's an absolute incredible guy. Everybody liked him. They cared. Leave him alone, doctor. They've brought his funeral clothes, his shroud, and they have his coffin standing by. Please, doc, leave him alone. Just let him die. Dr. Harlow wouldn't let Phineas Gage die. Instead, he cut off all of that fetid, horrible fungi that was sticking out of his head. He applied crystalline silver nitrate, which was used in those days to disinfect, to clean and help heal an open wound. He also laid open the frontalis muscle. These are the frontalis muscles here. They're the only ones that can raise and lower your eyebrows. So he cut through this one here because it was swelling right up. But as soon as he did that, 8 ounces of pus and blood oozed out, and it was described as excessively fetid. In other words, it stank. Do you know, it's amazing to think Dr. Harlow, he was experienced in treating cerebral abscesses. So his experience in doing that and treating Phineas, it must have contributed to saving Phineas Gage's life. The recovery process for Phineas Gage was going to be quite long, but he stunned the medical community. Within 3.5 weeks of the injury, he could raise himself up on his pillow, and in no time at all he could walk up and down the stairs, around the house, and even up and down the frontage of the house. And that's when the doctor went away for a week, that his friends could not restrain Phineas from going out in the rain without an overcoat. He caught a chill, had a fever. They thought, oh my gosh, but he recovered. By November, that's 2 months after the injury, he was fit enough to return home. But he had to go in an enclosed carriage. It was described as one of those that are used to move people with a mental health issue. He started in the spring to help with the animals, the horses, and feed the cattle. And then come June, he could do half a day's ploughing, but not everything was as it seemed. His personality had changed. As one person says, Gage was no longer Gage. His mother says his memory seems to have gone. A visitor to the farm wouldn't notice this, but I notice it. But it's what happens now. So Phineas Gage has pretty much recovered. The doctor describes examining him and says you could see the scar where the doctor had to cut through to allow the pus out. You could feel the quadrant shape of bone raised on the skull, but you could also see the brain pulsating just behind it. But apart from that, he seemed to be fine. But what was he going to do with his life? The railway would no longer employ him. An interesting turn of events in the life of Phineas Gage. When he'd recovered, he was invited in November 1849 to visit Harvard Medical School, and there the professor of surgery, Henry Jacob Bigelow, examined him. But he didn't believe that this spike had gone all the way through. It took him weeks, and then he realised exactly what had happened to Phineas. Once that was done, he then presented him to the Boston Society for Medical Improvement. Phineas Gage was now a medical phenomenon. Wow! In fact, he was able to become a living museum exhibit for Barnum's American Museum in New York City. And he often appeared at other locations too in New England, which I understand was self-publicised. He would be there with his beloved railway spike. Years later, Henry Bigelow describes Phineas Gage as a shrewd and intelligent businessman. And he would do these appearances just so he could earn an honest penny. Now that kind of sums him up, doesn't it? But this is not enough for a man to earn a living. He was uncomfortable with it, and in August 1852 he's invited or offered a job down in Chile as a stagecoach driver. Now this was a heavy goods stagecoach, 6 horses pulling it, and he loved it and he enjoyed looking after the horses. I read in one of the accounts that it was the regular work that helped almost realign his personality. But in 1859, his health begins to fail and he returns to the United States of America. In fact, he goes to San Francisco where his mother and sister had relocated. They help get him back to health, feed him up, and he does continue to do work with animals on the farms, that kind of thing. But on the 21st of May, 1860, poor old Phineas Gage finally succumbs to his injury. He dies from an epileptic fit. When I was doing the research on Phineas Gage, I came across conflicting articles about how when his brain had been pierced, his personality was changed forever. What does one of his friends say? Gage wasn't Gage. But others say that he recovered his personality, and in one case that he recovered his personality and it was better. What we do know that he loved the company of animals, especially working with horses, so this may have been therapy in its own right. But his physician, that's John Harlow, lost touch with Phineas Gage, but then read of Phineas's death down in San Francisco. Now, John Harlow got in touch with Phineas's mother and got permission to exhume Phineas's body and to take the skull. Now, there is one rumour that Phineas was buried with his iron spike, and the skull, together with the iron spike, are now still on display at the Warren Anatomical Museum, part of the Harvard Medical School. It's quite something when you think about it, because Phineas Gage's survival defied the odds, but his life after the accident changed him forever. His story reshaped neuroscience, making him the most famous patient in brain science history. Well, I hope you enjoyed that video of ours. It's a bit of an incredible story, really, the survival of Phineas Gage. But if you did enjoy it, like, share and subscribe. And if you'd like to support our channel further, why not have a look at joining our Patreon community? The link is in the description. Now, before I finish, quick shout out to some of our Patreon members. And as ever, I've got it written down. Some great handles here. Quick shout out, John Hawkwood, #1 fan. Wow. Dan's Creative Creatures. Now, I met Dan and his daughter Liv on a Google Hangout that we sometimes do with our Patreon community. Great fun. And then finally, what a famous name, John Ford. Hey guys, thanks a million. Bye for now.